Today, in our Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month segment, we spotlight 4 talented filmmakers who's made it their mission to honor, remember, and share the history of our Filipino nurses in their upcoming documentary, Nurse Unseen. For being here. I know we're all from different coasts, right? East Coast, California, Hawaii. So it means a lot to me for you all to be able to spend the time and share this very important documentary. And first, I want to start with Michele. Can you share with us, take us back to when you realized this needs to be done?
Well, it was an evolving process for me, really. After I had finished Happy Jail, which Carlo and I collaborated on, and it's on Netflix, we are really wanting to continue our agenda of telling Filipino stories. And me coming from a family full of nurses, my aunt, Tita Dodo, was our second mom and had passed several years ago. I had been thinking about her a lot and wanting to honor her in some way. And then the pandemic hit, and the heroism of our frontliners was on full display, and it just started to really fall into place for us. But this was a story that really could be told, that this is a project that we could really get behind. But it wasn't until late September last year when the National Nurses United study came out that really laid out this staggering statistic that over 30% of nurses' deaths due to COVID were Filipino nurses, our nurses. And that just really kicked us into high gear. And we knew right then and there, we really need to act fast and get this film out there so people are aware of what's going on.
Yes, and you mentioned Carlo. You've worked together in the past. Carlo, how did you become involved? Did Michele reach out to you?
She did. So as she had mentioned, she was talking about a project after Happy Jail, and that premiered on Netflix in August 2019. And I think during the past year, we were talking about what's the next project, and the Nurses Project always seemed to come up. She had talked about her aunt, who was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, and she said, I really want to honor her story and her contribution. And as Michele mentioned, just during the pandemic, it was very difficult because we were also concerned about going out into the field. We just knew that we couldn't interview people in person, and to really do this story justice, we wanted to have that intimate interview with them. That is Michele's strength. She really humanizes the story, and I think we wanted it to be a personal connection. As much as Zoom has afforded us this ability to connect with people around the country and around the world, we really wanted for this documentary for it to be in person. And I think for me, it was actually earlier this year when we heard news about the Philippine government looking to trade Filipino nurses for vaccines from the UK and Germany, when we really started to realize that this is not just an issue here in the US, but really an issue that affects Filipinos in the diaspora around the world, as well as Filipinos in the Philippines. And that was also around the time that Michele connected with Arlyn and Joe and discovered that they were also working on a project about Filipino nurses, and we thought we'd collaborate.
Wow, Arlyn and Joe, I know you both are nurses, you're also both veterans. Tell me more about how you all came together. As Carlo said, you were also working on a project?
Yes, initially I was working with Mark Nazal, and we had collaborated on other projects like some short films. But when it became very apparent that these stories were getting buried, they would receive some sort of attention even with the national mainstream media. But once the news cycle's over, they're forgotten. So I approached Mark and I said, hey, we need to tell these stories. And then we reached out to Arlyn, And then Arlene, pick up where how you um, got with Michele.
It was all kind of very serendipitous for us because 2 days before this clubhouse room that Michele and I were in is when Joe had reached out to me, just wanting to discuss to see, you know, if I wanted to come on board and help produce a story about Filipino nurses during the pandemic. And being a nurse and working through the pandemic, I said, absolutely, you know, this is such an important story. And of course, everybody knows that there's so many nurses in across the United States, globally. In Hawaii, we have a ton of Filipino nurses here as well. There's a high percentage as well in California and New York City. And you know, my mom is also a nurse. My sister, my aunties, cousins, like everybody I know is in nursing. And so I just felt like, okay, yeah, absolutely, I'm on board. So 2 days later, I was invited to be in the audience member of a clubhouse room that Michele and several of my other friends were guests on. And so I had asked Michele, you know, what's your process of doing a documentary? It's my first time doing it. And she had simply asked me, well, if you can tell me what your project is about, then you know, I can kind of fine tune my answer. And I was like, sure. So I mentioned it, and she gave me her pointers, and then that was that. And I thought, oh gosh, that was such a great, you know, time to be spending with other filmmakers. And then the next morning I woke up to a message from Michele asking to collaborate. And so we basically got our 2 teams together, and here we are.
Wow, that just gave me goosebumps listening to that. So it was meant to be, right? Now, Arlene and Joe, because you're both nurses, Joe, were you also working during the pandemic?
Yes, I never stopped working. I'm not at the bedside, but I still, I'm a case manager, and so I still deal with patients on a day-to-day basis. And I sort of felt powerless because, you know, here are all these nurses that were on the front lines, and I was technically on the front lines, but not really. So when the, you know, when the vaccination drive started to happen, I took a break from case management, and yeah, I'm actively vaccinating people.
In your, for both you and Arlene, because nurses, was there a specific angle that you wanted to focus on?
Definitely, you know, the nursing world is so different than filmmaking, and we just felt it was so important to, you know, incorporate the nurse's point of view, because you know, as much as everybody loves to watch medical drama, this is not, you know, this is such a heavy subject for everybody. And that's the brilliance of this film, is that you know, Michelle's style, it's truly, it comes from a Filipino heart, you know. And even, you know, if you watch any of her previous films that she's done, it's done in a way where it's, you know, it could be a heavy subject or, you know, a very lighthearted subject. It still encompasses the way Filipinos tell their stories, which, you know, there's lightheartedness to it there, and the basis of it is truly love. And so from a nursing standpoint, I think it's really important to showcase that, because yes, we are sacrificing so much for our families back home in the Philippines, here in the United States, wherever we're located. And why do we do that? It's for love, you know. And the question is so intriguing, you know, with how many Filipino nurses have died throughout this pandemic. Out of the nurses who have died, you know, it's, the question is why is that happening? And I think the way that the interviews have been conducted, because we're still in production, you know, everything that we've been learning about everyone involved, that it goes back to love. It goes back to, you know, why we're doing it. And so it's been amazing to see everything unfolding throughout this documentary process. There's like that cultural aspect too of we always take care. And seeing the Filipino families taking care of their own, when I was working in critical care, I mean, they don't leave. They're there day in and day out. They take shifts, versus like other cultures. I didn't really see that, or sometimes they would just be so afraid to be there. But Filipino families, man, they come in groves, there might be 30 people pre-pandemic, like, okay, we're all here, let's pray now, and faith portion is a big deal too, and so I think there's a lot of cultural, economic aspects with that history of why so many Filipinos came, and to learn more, from historians is amazing, because I didn't even know that as a nurse, why. I just thought, I figured every family was like that. You don't know your major in college? Oh, it's nursing.
Also in the Philippines, once you have a daughter or a son finish nursing school, it's like your ticket to a better life, because that son or that daughter will be able to work abroad, send money back. So really, so the more nurses you have in the family, the better it is for the families. And the Philippines, the mindset is family first. It's like, I don't care about your individual, whatever you want to do with your life, you're supporting the family. It's like Jokoy says, like Jokoy says, your mom shits on your dreams, right? Like, you think you're funny? Nobody's a clown here. But yeah, no, it really is like, it's life and death. You become a nurse, and that's your chance to support the family.
Yeah. Well, now
I think Michelle had.
Sorry, Carlo.
Sorry, Kat. I was just going to say, Michelle had alluded to this earlier when we interviewed Professor Choi about her book, about her book Empire of Care, but also about her lifelong research about Filipino nurses in the US. One statistic that really stood out for me was that she was saying at one point, working as a nurse in the US for 1 year would be equivalent to about 20 years of work in the Philippines. And so when you think about that statistic, that's quite groundbreaking, right? To think like, wow, if you work 1 year abroad and you send that money back, that could go a really long way and help a lot of people, as Joe and Arlene and Michelle have been saying, in terms of like, that could really help you and your family.
Yeah, Michelle and Carlo, what was your angle, or what was the message that you wanted to share with the audience by working on this documentary?
For me, like with all my projects lately, it's really about centering the Filipino experience, because if we don't do it, no one is going to do it. So I wanted to dissect and really explore why Filipino nurses were being so affected, and the pandemic was taking such an outside toll. Of course, that was such an important question to ask, but I really wanted to highlight, to follow up with what Arlene was saying about the love and the love of community, the love of family, that is really the center of what it means to be Filipino. And that's really what I want this film to communicate to the rest of the world. We're such an amazing group of people. These Filipino nurses are heroes, and they shouldn't be invisible. We should know about their entire experience, as full and complex and layered as it really is.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry, Carl. Go ahead.
No, you go, Joe, please.
No, I was just gonna say that initially it was all about the sacrifice of these nurses, but it's become much more nuanced and a lot more complex. So I'm gonna let Carlo take over.
No, thanks, Joe. I think, for me, what really drew me to this story when Michelle pitched it to me is that idea of why did so many Filipino nurses move from the Philippines and come to the US? That was the genesis of the documentary and the inciting question for this project. And for myself, being born in the Philippines, growing up in Australia, and moving to the US about 8 years ago, I understand that thought process of looking for opportunities elsewhere. And, for me, I am so grateful for the sacrifices that my parents made for me to get an education in Australia and to have an amazing career. But there was something drawing me to the US. And I definitely believe it is this collaboration with other Filipino filmmakers, other Filipino members, community members of the diaspora, and telling Filipino stories from the Filipino perspective. And it is definitely something that I was able to do with Michele through Happy Jail. I was able to do with Isabel Sandoval on Lingua Franca. And I feel like it's an experience that, I would love to take back to Australia. So learning from this experience on Nurse Unseen, and then potentially taking all of those experiences from the US to Australia, and being able to tell the Filipino-Australian story, for example. But I think ultimately it is, as Joe was saying, that sacrifice that, okay, I'm going to leave behind my family, my friends, my comfort zone in the Philippines, and move to a different country, in this case, to the US, to work, to earn a career, or to develop a career, and then earn money to send back to family and relatives in the Philippines. It's just part of this very intricate and very important network that needs to be, I guess, explored in a humanistic and a very sensitive, very respectful manner. And I think, with Michele at the helm of this documentary, that's what we're starting to really see. As Arlyn mentioned, when we speak to our interviewees and the people who have been so generous with their stories, there is never a dry eye when we're doing these interviews with Michele. Like, everyone in the room is just weeping, and it's fortunate that we're wearing masks because our tears are like captured by the masks that we're wearing during the interviews. Otherwise, we would just be like bawling our eyes.
Just recently, well, actually, I think it was late last year, maybe, I was talking to Jolene Levitt, who created this website, kanlungan.net. And I mean, I was in tears during the entire interview for what she was doing. And it was so shocking because I'm going through the memorial wall and I recognize one of them to be my cousin's godfather who passed away. I mean, I knew he passed away and he was a retired nurse who just happened to come back because of COVID. And so this means a lot to me as well. Plus I have a ton of family members that are nurses, and I'm getting emotional right now, but it means a lot. Thank you. I need a minute.
Thank you for sharing that. I understand completely. Like, when Carlo's saying that there's not a dry eye, it's so true. I mean, we've all been through collectively so much, and just the amount of pain and loss and grief is something that we're going to be dealing with for years, if not generations to come. So it's so heavy, and I really have so much empathy for you and your loss. I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. I had only met him once, but just, seeing everyone there, it just hits you. And then knowing at least one person, you're like, oh my goodness. And then she told me stories about a kid who was just in nursing. He just started and he lost his life. And I thought, these poor people, we need to remember them. We need to celebrate and just thank them for all of the work they did. I mean, putting your life before everybody else's. I mean, Joe, Arlyn, thank you. And thank you, Michele and Carlo, for sharing this story. I mean, I love how you say it's for our community, by our community as well. And speaking of, I know we can help out. Can you tell us how?
So this is an exciting thing that we decided to do as a group. There's many different ways to make a film, many different ways to fund a film. We decided to go the Kickstarter route through crowdfunding because we really felt that this film about the community should be made by the community, you know? And I think that there's something so beautiful and so meaningful behind that. So we just launched on National Nurses Day a very ambitious Kickstarter campaign to fund a lot of the production of this film. We're asking for $50,000, and Kickstarter is all or nothing. So we have 30 days to raise $50,000. And if we don't hit that goal, then we get nothing. But if we do, yay, then we can move forward. So that's where we're at now. So I believe when this airs, it'll be less than 20 days, and we're about 25% funded. So we have a long way to go, but we feel really confident that we'll make it.
Yes, especially with reaching out to our community and just sharing this story. It's so important. I'm sure everyone will want to be a part of it. You know, going back to Carlo, well, all of you talking about the people you've interviewed, how did you find the people that you interviewed?
I mean, I can start us off. We can't begin to answer the question why Filipinos are suffering so disproportionately without looking back at the history of why so many Filipinos came to the US. So through our research, we all collectively found that there was one person, Dr. Catherine Siniza Choi, who we had to interview and had to go to as this expert voice. So she's been studying this topic, how nurses have migrated to the US for decades. So that was just our natural starting point. And then from there, it was just a lot of research and trying to find, I mean, there's no shortage of poignant personal stories. So it's kind of the opposite problem of other projects. Like we just have a surplus of stories and angles and people we want to speak to. It's just really kind of focusing it and finding and curating the right stories to make up this tapestry that will be Nurse Unseen. So it's been just like researching and reaching out to these people, seeing if they're willing to open up and be vulnerable on film. A lot of the stuff has been reported in the news, so we kind of double dip there and try to find really engaging stories that way. But we in that way, we found the Pambuan family. There is this nurse, Merlin Pambuan, who's a veteran ICU nurse who works in Long Beach. And she came down with COVID in April of last year and was put into an induced coma and was hospitalized at the very hospital that she worked at for about 8 months. But because of the support of her family, particularly her daughter, Chantel, she got through it, and she truly is a miracle. So she's someone that we automatically gravitated towards, and we've been lucky to really spend a lot of time filming with her and their entire family.
And Kat, you had mentioned Jolene Livid, the co-founder of Kanlungan.net, and we were actually very fortunate to speak with Jolene for the documentary. So Joe and Arlene had actually reached out to Jolene, and Michelle and I had reached out to Jolene, and this was before we joined forces. So we knew that we wanted to speak with Jolene and about her experience with her mom being a nurse and being part of the sisterhood of nurses that she referenced. And then she also put us in touch with the daughter of the first healthcare worker to pass from COVID in LA County, Rosary Castro Olega. And so we, through Jolene, we were able to speak with Rosary's daughter, Tiffany, and we were able to interview her 2 weeks ago. So that's another way that we've been able to connect with the community and also to figure out who to speak to and include in this documentary. But I think we also really depend and rely on both Joe and Arlene in terms of, introducing us to the nurses union and associations to also connect with the Philippine National Association, Association of America, as well as other unions, and maybe they'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, so luckily, you know, with being a registered nurse and an Army veteran and being an actress and filmmaker, you know, we all kind of just naturally go to all of our resources in our community. And it happened to be that one of my very good friends, his mother-in-law, is heavily involved with the Philippine Nurses Association of America. And we were able to really connect with her and then the president of PNAA. And, you know, from a nurse's standpoint, and I used to work critical care. That's what I did in the military for about 9 years, or almost 10 years, I should say. And you know, with nurses, we're, especially in critical care, we're very blunt, we're very direct, we're very on the go, and we will call out BS if we see it. And so, you know, it was very important for us to, you know our audience when going in, because a lot of the times, especially when you're talking to a hospital administration or nurse executives, they know what you know, like awards are in film and all of that, but they're really thinking about, okay, what is this going to do, you know, to our organization? Are we going to be highlighted in the appropriate way? And you know, I think from mine and Joe's perspective is like, we're here, we got your back, we are nurses too, and we would never bring in, our team to talk to you unless we for sure were going to take care of you. And so from that point, I think it's been very helpful collaboratively coming together and approaching these organizations, because, we need to earn their trust, because documentaries can be about anything, right? You never know, like, okay, they can be telling us this, but then when it comes out, what if they're saying, something that's not really accurate? And that's where, that brutal honesty from the critical care standpoint of being a nurse is like, we will ensure that, because you can't fake it in the medical world. Like, they will see right through it. I mean, how many nurses out there watch medical shows and they're like, why are they using a Yankauer, suctioner to use with an intubated patient that's not even like a real ET tube? They'll kind of critique all those things. And so I think that's the great part about the collaboration, is that we're able to kind of fine tune all of those little details that, most people, unless you're in the medical world, they would realize that.
I think the response has been very heartwarming. And stories just come from everywhere, and people identify, oh, my aunt's a nurse, oh, I am a nurse, and one of the most heart-wrenching, not heart-wrenching, but it was heart-tugging. It tugged at my heartstrings because I cold called someone from the SAIU 121 RN union, and I spoke to their communications director, and she doesn't know me from Jack, right? So after just maybe 10 minutes of talking about the project, as soon as I mentioned our title, Nurse Unseen, it made her cry. She wept because she had lost someone, Celia Marcos, who's a Filipino American nurse. They had lost a member. And so these, 10 minutes into the conversation, she was crying. So this is how poignant these stories are. And, but, so far the response has been very, very, very good, but we still need a lot of help.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, yes, thank you so much for sharing your stories. If, we want more information, I know you mentioned the Kickstarter campaign. Is there a website or any social media sites that we can go to for more info?
We don't have a website quite yet, but you can find Nurse Unseen on Facebook and Nurse Unseen Doc at Instagram and Twitter, actually. So we're trying to be really active on all those accounts. So you can contact us or get in touch with us very easily.